In Lesson 14, we're going to discuss sources and how they are used in SSIS packages. Sources are used to extract data from a source system, and what we're going to cover is three of the most commonly used sources, which is the OLEDB source, the flat file source, and the Excel source. Some of the things that we'll talk about within each of these are how a flat file source has a special option that's actually hidden from the main menu called Fast Parse, which can be enabled in the advanced options. Also, we'll talk about how the Excel source can only be used in 32-bit mode, and I'll show you how to enable that. So the first source we're going to explore in this lesson will be the OLEDB source. And if you're unfamiliar with the acronym, it's called OLEDB for Object Linking and Embedding Database. So with all sources, you're going to first drag over a data flow task from your toolbox in the top left. And you'll see I already have it highlighted here to just click and drag it over. And you'll see throughout this book that we generally will give the data flow task or any task that we're dealing with an acronym, so either DF for data flow or DFT for data flow task. This time I'll say DFT for data flow task, and then you give it some kind of significant name with what you're doing. So we're just exploring the source, so I'll go ahead and give it that name. Alright, so the next step is going to be to dig into our data flow task. And there's two ways to do that. We could either select the data flow tab on the top portion here, or we can just double click on the data flow task itself. Alright, and in this example, as you can see, we're going to be using the OLEDB source. So to choose that source, you're going to go to your toolbox, grab the OLEDB source by clicking and holding it, and drag it onto your screen. So once you've done that, we have the next step to go to, which is creating a connection manager. And we have two options that we can do that we can use to do this. We could either double click on our actual source and create a new connection manager here, or we can do it on the bottom area here where it tells you can right click to add a new connection manager. Let's go ahead and do it that way. So right click on your bottom screen and say new OLEDB connection. And often if you've used SSIS already, you're going to have some preset connections in here. If you haven't, it'll be blank. So I'm going to do it the way that you will probably have to. So I'm going to hit delete. So you'll see I have no preset connections that I can choose from. And I'll select new to create a new one. Now you can either do the drop down box or you can type in localhost. Localhost is of course your current machine you're on, or the drop down box should show your server list. So I'm going to go ahead and do localhost. And then your next step will be to specify the database that you're getting your data from. So from the drop-down list, let's go ahead and select AdventureWorks 2008 because that's what we're going to use for this example. And you'll always want to test your connection, which is simply just click test, and you'll see the test connection succeeded. Click OK, and OK again to confirm, and one last time. You'll see now that this has a different, or has a preset in here now. So if I try and create another OLEDB connection manager, that preset will be available for me. So go ahead and click OK. And then you'll always want to rename your connection managers generally just to the database name, so that it does not include the server name as a prefix. So just simply take off your server name so you have AdventureWorks. Now you're ready to dig into your source and to set the connection manager to it, which when you only have one connection manager and it matches what kind of source you're using, it'll automatically put that in there. As you can see, when I opened it earlier, I didn't have this AdventureWorks 2008 connection manager available, but after I created it in the bottom here, it automatically imported into it. So our next step is we could either, we're going to select the kind of data access mode. You can either use table or view, and that's going to bring back the entire contents of a table or a view. Or you could do a SQL command or SQL command from variable, as well as the table name or view name variable. I generally always select the SQL command. This way you can say exactly which columns you want to bring back. You could do it as well with the table, so let's go ahead and show you that real quickly. We're going to end up doing the SQL command for this example, but I want to show you an example of how this works. Once you select table or view, right below you'll select which table or view you want to use. So let's just select one just so we can take a look at it. And I selected Human Resources Employee Pay History. You'll also want to go to your Columns tab to select which columns you want to include. The reason I suggest that you always use the SQL command is this way you can just bring back the columns that you want. You could also do it here by unchecking the ones that you don't want. But it's always a best practice to, instead of saying you want to bring back the entire table and then killing a couple columns, it's always best to just start off with a SQL command, and then you already have exactly which columns you have. So I already have this I copied and pasted the data I want to bring over from the production.transaction history table. I've got this preset columns that I want. Once I've entered the SQL statement in, you'll still want to go to columns, and you can see which ones you want to include. I want to go ahead and include all of them. So once you've completed that, go ahead and click OK. Alright, and the last step for the OLEDB source, because this section is only on sources, we're going to go ahead and have somewhat of a trash destination. So if you want to try this out, it's great for debugging. Bring over a union all. Scroll down for your union all. Bring that over and connect. And the only reason we're doing this is it's just a test. So you would normally have a different kind of destination that you find on the bottom here. But like I said, we're just trying to test it. So go ahead and if you want to test this data flow task that we have so far, we can go back to our control flow and execute the task. You can give it a moment here. Even though it had the red mark, it will. It's saying that it sees our union all task, and our union all isn't a typical destination. But in this case, for testing, it worked perfect. And you can see that we had 38,521 rows pass through from our source into our destination. Which, like I said, this union all isn't actually putting the data anywhere, but it's used as a great tip for debugging. So if you're trying to just process some of your data here, and you are trying to load it in somewhere, or you don't necessarily want to load it in somewhere, the union all is a great trash destination. So we're ready to move on to our next source that we're going to try out. To stop the current package we have running, just hit the stop button up top. You'll notice that when we first ran this package, I went into the control flow and right-clicked on the task and hit execute task. That's one option to execute. You could also just hit the play button or start debugging up top. So let's go ahead and start our next data flow, which is going to be for an Excel source. So go ahead and bring over a data flow task. And we'll use the same naming convention that we did with the first one, DFT. And we'll call this one Excel source. You'll still notice this red X on the OLEDB source data flow. It's not a problem. Remember that we used a union all as a destination, which we're going to do in all three of them. Sometimes you'll get this red error looking thing, even regardless of whether it's working or not. We might see later on throughout these that we don't get them, but like I said, just ignore that for the purposes of this demo. So let's go ahead and go into our Excel source. Excuse me, I think I said Excel source. This is actually our data flow task where we're going to bring over an Excel source. So go into your toolbox and select the Excel source, which you'll drag over just like you did the first time. And this time, instead of creating our connection manager in the bottom portion here, we'll do it inside the task just to do something different. Go ahead and double click on the Excel source to open the editor. And this time we'll select New Connection Manager. You will notice there's a little bit of a bug here. Right in this portion here, you'll see the OLEDB Connection Manager. Well, this is actually an Excel Connection Manager, but as part of the screen, SSIS actually made a mistake here. This is actually an Excel Connection Manager we're going to create. So let's browse to the location of the Excel file. You're going to hit Browse. And I have my Excel file located in the Projects folder under SSIS Personal Trainer and Inventory Worksheet. This is Excel 97 through 2003 version. And we do want to leave the first row has column names box checked. When you have that, click OK. And then you're ready to select the Excel sheet that we're going to work with. And this one we're going to work with the inventory worksheet. So select that. One last thing that we didn't talk about in the first source, but was also an option there in the OLEDB source, is that we could preview what our data is going to look like. It'll show us the first 200 rows, and you can see that we, if you remember when we just set this up, we said that we want the first columns to, or the first row to be the column name, and that gave us our column headers here. And that just kind of gives you a quick preview of what your data is going to look like when it's brought in. And just click Close to bypass that. Now, if you also wanted to take a look at what columns are being brought in, just click the columns, and this shows us what the columns are going to be brought in from the Excel source. Alright, so now you're ready to click OK. Now, if you remember from the first slide, we talked about there's a special feature when you're using the Excel source that is important to set, which is the 32-bit mode option. And to set this, you actually are going to go into your Solution Explorer on the side. And you're going to right click on the project. In this case it's Knight's 24-hour trainer, so right click on it and go into the properties, and under the debugging option you'll see run 64-bit runtime, and for this case we want that to be set to false. We do not want to run in 64-bit mode, and this is exclusive to the Excel source. So when you're working with an Excel source, you need to make sure that it's using 32-bit runtime. So we're going to apply that. If you don't set this, you'll notice that each time you try and run this, it's going to fail every time. So go ahead and click OK. And we'll do the same thing that we did for the first data flow, is use the union all as a temporary destination. So connect that with the green arrow. If for some reason this did fail, if you were actually sending it to a normal destination and things didn't match up, this red arrow gives you an error output where you can send the error rows. Alright, so before we kick off the package, some last touch-up things. Let's go ahead and change the name of our connection manager that we created inside the task, or inside the transform, to inventory. Inside the source, actually. And we're ready to kick this off. We changed our settings to use 32-bit mode. I actually am running on a 64-bit machine. If you're running on a 32-bit machine, you don't have to make that change that we did in the Solution Explorer. But just remember, if you are using a 64-bit machine, which a lot of servers are, you'll have to make that change inside your projects. Right-clicking into the properties. I'll show you one last time. And then under debugging, you'll change run 64-bit time to false. Okay, so let's go ahead and kick this package off. This time let's just do the exclusively to this task. You'll see I still have that red X because of the union all, but we just want to kick off this task, not both of them. So just hit execute task by right-clicking, and then selecting execute task, and you'll see that went pretty fast. And we have 2,138 rows went into our trash destination. So that's how the Excel source works. And we're ready to go ahead and move on to our last one, which is going to be the flat file source. So let's bring over a new source, our new data flow task. And if you might have just noticed that we still have the red X on this one, but the red X disappeared on this one. The union all is a little finicky with when it gives you that error and when it doesn't. If you highlight over it, it kind of gives you an idea of what the error is, and it's telling you the union all has a dangling output. So let's follow the same kind of idea that we have with the first two. Let's rename the data flow task DFT, and this time it's going to be flat file source. And once we've renamed it, go ahead and get into your data flow task by double clicking. Alright, so now we're ready to do our flat file source by going into your toolbox and bringing over the flat file source, which is on the top again with all the other sources. And once you bring that over, go ahead and double click on it to open the editor. And we'll create our new connection manager the same way we did the other. Remember, each time you have any kind of source or destination, you have to use a connection manager to point the to tell SSIS what location the data needs to go to. So let's do a new flat file connection manager. And it's going to bring up the flat file connection manager editor. And let's name this one flat file extract. And you don't necessarily have to give it a description, but if you want to, you can. We'll just name this employee list. And then we'll browse for the location of the flat file by hitting browse. And we're going to use employee list in its text file. So go ahead and select that and then hit open. And there's several options here. You'll see different row delimitation that you could use. This is saying it has carriage return. You can also, in this case, what we want to do is check the columns, or we want to check this box which says the column name is in the first row of data. And you can also go to the Columns tab, just trying to get a quick preview of what your data is going to look like. If we hadn't selected that the first row was the column names, it wouldn't look like that. We would have no column names, and we would have the employee ID as our first row, and that's not exactly what we're looking for. We also see here that we have it's comma delimited file, so that means that between each of these records, there's a comma that's separating it to tell whoever's looking at it that there's different columns. And then again, you can also preview it, which also kind of looks like the same thing that we had in the column section. So now that we have that, go ahead and click OK. And if you'd like to take one more look at the columns that you want to include, if you wanted to uncheck some, you have that option still. But we want to include all of them, so go ahead and click OK again. And I'd mentioned in the slide in the beginning that there is a very neat function that's kind of hidden from us called fast parse. And it's a best practice if you're very confident in the data that you have, that you might want to change some of your columns to use fast parsed. So the basic idea behind fast parse is that it's skipping validation on the certain columns that you're bringing in. So SSIS would typically validate the data that you're bringing in through the flat file, and with fast parse, it's skipping that option. So to enable fast parse, you're going to, what I did was right click on the source and do show advanced editor. And where we want to go in here is to the input and output properties. And then we're going to flat file source output, and then output columns. Then you'll see the 4 different columns that we have. To enable fast parse, you have to enable for each individual column. And to do that, you'll see the fast parse option we have right here. To enable it for this column, you switch it from false to true. And basically now we're skipping validation on our employee ID column. If that's what you want, go ahead and click OK. It's not necessarily what I want for this, so I'm just going to click false. It wouldn't matter really for this option, or for this example, but I wanted to show you how to do that. And that'll give you a great performance boost if you're having a lagging flat file source. So keep that in mind. Alright, so we're done with that. Let's go ahead and click OK. And we're actually done with our flat file source as well. So again, we're going to use that temporary destination of the union all. So once you drag the union all over, connect it with the green arrow, and we're ready to execute it. So let's go ahead and go back to our control flow. Instead of executing all 3 of our data flow tasks, let's just execute the flat file one by right clicking again and execute task. And you'll see it quickly, well, I say quickly, it'll turn to green. And let's go ahead and dig into it and see how many rows we moved. Well, this flat file only had 3 rows. So that's how we do the sources. This is, again, this is some of the commonly used sources. I'm going to go ahead and stop our package. Alright, and to wrap up what we learned in this lesson, we learned that sources are used to extract data, and the way we extracted data in this example was could either be from a database, a SQL server in this case, which was with the OLEDB source, a flat file, which in our case was a text file, and then with also a possible Excel file. Also, we learned how to do some special options like the fast parse, which in a flat file source enabled us to skip validation on selected columns that we chose. Another option that we learned was 32-bit mode option in Excel source, which we enabled strictly because the Excel source can only be run in 32-bit mode.